Hello and welcome to Multiplying Fractions with Mixed Numbers. Before you look at this, if you haven't seen the previous video on how to multiply fractions, you really need to look on that to understand why and how multiplying fractions works, because this really only looks at moving on from there and looking at mixed numbers. So if we look at our first question, 1 3/4 multiplied by 2/3. And the real problem that we have is this mixed number here. And the first thing we actually need to do is write this mixed number as an improper fraction, often called a top-heavy fraction as well. And this can be hard to visualize, and actually the best way to do this is you'll always find us say is drawing a bar or drawing a diagram of what 1 3/4 actually looks like. So if I draw myself out a bar, and you've got to first of all think, what am I going to divide it into? Well, I divide it into how many pieces my denominator tells me. So there's my 4 pieces, and I have 1 whole and 3/4, so I'm going to have to draw another bar out because I have more than 1. And again, I'm going to divide that into quarters because my denominator is quarters. So first of all, dealing with that 1, I'm going to shade in 1 whole. So shading in 1 whole, that will be that. So that's 1 whole, and then I need to shade in 3/4. So I'm going to shade in 3/4. So if I'm going to now write that as an improper fraction, how many quarters do I actually have? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I now know that 1 3/4 is the same as 7/4. So whenever I'm doing one of these with mixed numbers, I just need to draw the diagram out to help me move it into an improper fraction, and I know I have 7/4. Now I can get on with the actual question, which I'm going to do back up here. So 7/4, because that's the way I'm writing my fraction now. I'm writing it rather than as a mixed number, I'm writing as an improper fraction multiplied by 2/3. And if you remember, from the last video, that would then be 14, because it's 7 multiplied by 2. I'll put that extra stage in to remind you, and 4 multiplied by 3, which is 14/12. So I now have an improper fraction as well. Because I know 14/12 is actually more than 1, because my numerator is larger than my denominator, and if my numerator is larger than my denominator, I have more than 1. So I can see that 12 goes in there once, remainder 2, because I could split this up into 12 over 12, because that would give me 1 whole, and then I would have 2 over 12. And because I'm splitting this up into how many wholes I've got and then how much left over, which is 2/12. And then I would write that as 12 out of 12 is 1, and 2/12, I can cancel that down to being 1/6, because we need to make sure, and actually cancelling it down is not a really good term. What we're finding is an equivalent fraction. What we actually mean by that is, what value can I divide the numerator and the denominator by that is the same, and I can divide both of those by 2. And I have 1 1/6. Okay, let's do one more example, slightly more difficult. So this one here, I have 2 mixed numbers. What I'd like you to do, press pause and write them both as improper fractions. Off you go. Press pause, press play when you've done that. So this is the first one, 1 2/3. You can see I've drawn out my bars. I've divided them into 3 sections because 3 is my denominator and they're in thirds. I've coloured them in and I have 5/3. If you didn't quite get that, now have a go at this one, see if you can get it right. If you've managed to get this one correct and you've done this one, carry on listening. So 2 3/5 is equal to 13/5, and you can see that by my diagram of 2 holes there, and here I've coloured in 3/5, so I got 5, 10, 11, 12, 13/5. So I've now converted my mixed numbers into improper fractions. So I can do the next stage, which would then be 5/3 multiplied by 13/5. So carrying on, 5 times 13, that's 65, over 3 times 5, which is 15. Now this is really quite a large improper fraction, so we can see the numerator is significantly larger, and I want to work out how many times 15 goes into here. So I'm going to write out over on the right hand side my 15 times table, which you can always do. People don't do these things enough, and I can see that the important number for me is 60 because I've written out my 15 times table here: 15, 30, 45, 60, 75. So 60 is the key number, and so 60, that means it's 4 lots of 15 go into there, and how much would be left over? It would be 5/15. Because actually I might just write an extra stage there to help you see it perhaps a little better. It would be, I'm going to split it up into 60 over 15 and 5 over 15. The 60 because it's exact here, and then the 5 because that's like your remainder. And then I know 60 out of 15 is 4 and 5/15, but 5/15 can be cancelled down, and I've used that word cancelled down, which is not good. It's equivalent fractions, so 5/15 can be written as an equivalent fraction, which means there's a number that I can divide the numerator and the denominator by. I can divide my numerator by 5, I can divide my denominator by 5, and I would end up with 4 and 1/3. So that's my final answer. So there's really 2 key things we need to be aware of here. We need to write our mixed numbers as improper fractions, and then when we have completed our calculations, we need to make sure that we simplify them.